Good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm David Tansey. I'm the AAA's Regional Airports Manager. For any technical assistance you require today, please phone Redback Support on 1800 733 416. If you would like to listen to this webinar through your phone instead, please dial in and the number and the passcode is listed in the chat box. Today we present the fifth webinar, and the topic is Part 139 Post-Implementation Review, Changing the Rules. This is jointly presented by the CASA project lead, Darren and Angelo, as well as Hannah Collett, the communications officer, and Denise, Morman, project manager. And we're very grateful that they've given us their time to do that today. In today's webinar, Darren, Hannah and Denise will explain the impetus for updating the rules in Part 139 and the policy foundations driving the change proposals. With consultation on the rules now open, CASA will also outline what's next if the proposals are accepted and how aerodrome operators will be supported to meet the new requirements. If you'd like to ask a question of any of the presenters, please use the chat box, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen, just to the right of the cogwheel. After typing out your question, hit enter to submit. Questions will be answered through the webinar. Before we start, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Darren, Hannah and Denise, and with no further ado, I'll hand over to them. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of myself, Hannah and Denise, we'd first like to thank you all for your time in viewing this webinar on the post-implementation review of Part 139. We're very humbled by the strong response we've had. I believe there's over 100 webinar recipients. And some of you may have seen the divisional meetings that we've actually provided over the last several months, and also at the July Payments and Lighting Forum. But what we'd like to focus on today is something a little bit different. It's actually mapping the policy that actually drives the project to the key proposals. So one of the themes of the presentation that we'd like to cover on is basically explaining the why. But what I'd like to do firstly is just give you a bit of a roadmap for the next 30 minutes or so. We'd like to focus on the journey today because we're aware that some of the individuals out there may have not seen one of the presentations. So we'd like to sort of recap on what we've done today. So then we'll map the policies to the key change proposals, provide some information about how you can provide feedback, and then we'd like to talk about some of the next steps in the project post-consultation. And then we'd like to open the floor to any questions that you may have on our work today. So the presentation theme, as I sort of indicated before, is helping to explain the why. So context is actually quite important because we want to get the most valuable feedback we can from you, the affected parties out there in the industry. But firstly, the journey today. So to start with, we've actually got two governing policies for any regulatory development work. The first is the Australian Government's commitment to cutting red tape, which can be found in the Australian Government Guide to Regulation. Internally to CASA, we also have a directive that was released in 2015, and that's titled The Development and Application of Risk-Based and Cost-Effective Aviation Safety Regulation. There's two hyperlinks that we provided with the slide pack, which you can actually go to the source document. But starting with the overall governing policies, the first one is that regulation should not be the default position and basically means that default regulation should not be made for its own sake. And the greatest net benefit should always be the recommended option. Now, our focus is on aviation safety, and I'll explain that in a subsequent slide as to how that meets our requirements. But the cost burden of any new regulation must be also offset by reduction to existing regulatory burden. And we believe through this review that we've identified some unnecessary cost imposts on industry that we can remove as an offset to any new regulation we're looking to impose. Policymakers, of course, need to consult in a genuine, timely way with affected industry, businesses, community organisations, stakeholders, etc. And all regulation must be periodically reviewed to test its continuing relevance. What we want to assure you today is this is only the start of basically a never-ending journey. So whilst we're giving the rules a much-needed improvement and review, this is going to be the start of subsequent amendments, etc., as we ensure that Part 139 stays relevant and current. So with CASA's internal regulatory policy, we need to assure that any proposed aviation safety regulation must be necessary to address known or likely safety risk. And it needs to contribute to aviation safety, and our focus is particularly on passengers and affected persons. Aviation safety regulations should conform to the framework for the classification of aircraft operation. And this is actually changing with some other projects we've got active under CASA's Part 91, which is rules for pilots, and also the regulation of high capacity and low capacity air transport, which is under 121 and 135. Of course, all our standards and recommended practices originate from ICAO, and as a signatory of ICAO, we've got a commitment to follow the Convention on Civil Aviation. Of course, however, we'll adopt local differences where necessary and appropriate for our particular industry and operating conditions here in Australia. But we need to also be consistent with international best practice and look for what is best practice worldwide. We've tried to attempt to do that through the post-implementation review. So aviation safety regulations that CASA put forward must specify intended safety outcomes, and whilst there is a drive for prescriptive requirements, sometimes outcome-based approaches are appropriate or prescriptive where an outcome-based approach won't address the required safety risk. But we're looking to adopt both wherever possible. And also we need to look at industry cost and regulatory impost to ensure that our regulations are efficient. So there's sort of the overarching policies which we need to follow. And they very much are the drivers for the change that we're looking to put forward. So I've talked about the first two. The industry themselves have highlighted numerous issues with inflexibility, and it also a desire for an outcome-based regulatory model. So we've tried to address that in the review as well. ICAO Annex 14 has also undergone significant amendments. So we've tried to capture as much of those. We've actually done a sort of mini amendment to the current MOS to accommodate some of those changes. There's further changes ICAO putting forward, which we're looking to put into this review as well. From when the rules were first made in 2003, various technological advances have happened since their implementation, and we've also got to look to emerging technologies. And of course, any review gives us the opportunity to harmonise, clarify and adapt requirements, and address any historical issues that have been identified. So the Part 139 journey, which has been going for just over 2 years, we identified 400 discrete issues between the manual of standards under Part 139 and also with the regulation. And we did that through an internal review, but also the two very, very comprehensive submissions from the Australian Airport Association and also direct submissions we've had from key industry stakeholders. But we also did some research because we wanted to see what other regulators are up to. Specifically, we've looked at the European approach under the European Aviation Safety Administration, also the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States, Transport Canada, which is actually quite useful for us because Canada's legal system is very similar to Australia's. We've also looked at what the United Kingdom are doing with the Civil Aviation Authority, and also New Zealand, who recently conducted a post-implementation review of Part 139. What we then did is formed an industry project team, which we tried to make representative of the greater industry. So on that group, we had small, rural, regional, and also large international aerodrome operator representatives, but also technical consultants. We also had other departmental representation for the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development, and also the users of aerodromes being the pilots and the pilot associations, the glider federation. So we tried to cover a good representative group. From that, we've looked to redraft the regulations and the MOS, and we've prepared and released the MPRM package ready for your feedback. So this is the pictorial of the PI journey to date. So as I said, it started with a policy, which we then put to the working group as a notional acceptance of industry, and then we continue to the next stage, which is lay drafting. Now, lay drafting is a very crude step, but basically it's where we take the existing regulation and the manual of standards, and in a Word document, we start to make piecemeal edits to try to sort of translate policy into technical changes. But once we had those, in a sense, semi-settled, we then issued what we called formal instructions to our legislative drafters. And legislative drafters come in two forms. We've got the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, or OPC, and they are the drafters of regulation. It's worth noting, however, that they are doing regulations across all of government, including all bills, and work for all the federal agencies and departments. So CASA was in the queue of all that work, but likewise CASA is doing numerous regulatory development projects which include Part 139. So the resources were scarce. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken about 2.5 years to actually get a settled draft of the regulation ready for consultation. Internally, however, we do the manual standards drafting. Now, this process is a circular process. So again, we start with the policy and issues and go to lay drafting. But what we need to start with is what needs fixing. And to do that, we'll focus on the policy and the issues register that we generated. Once we went through lay drafting and the formal drafting, we then restructured the document. Now, in 2003, when the MOS was first made, it actually wasn't a legislative instrument. It was subsequently legislated, which poses a problem for us because the document is a mixture of standards but also guidance material. So the new MOS we're putting forward is being restructured to only contain musts, but also the word mays, and mays allow multiple options which support outcome-based regulation, which I'll explain a little bit later. We then relocated the shoulds to guidance materials, which will normally be our suite of advisory circulars, and normally on a Part 139, but there might also be some other advisory circulars and other rule parts that will support what we're doing in this review. There was a lot of feedback we received from industry about the technical diagrams which are throughout the MOS, so we've redrawn a number of those in the hope of correcting all the technical errors. But at the end, we ask ourselves, have we fixed it? So we then recheck the proposed change against the policy and issues register, and then we start on a new chapter. And this is the process we use for all the chapters of the MOS to reach the draft that we've out for consultation. So what I'd like to do now is map some of the policies I talked about earlier to some of the key proposals. Now, it's impossible for me to go through every change in the MOS, but it's now publicly available in the NPRM, but I just want to highlight some of the high-level ones. The first one is that existing triggers may unduly affect aerodrome operators, and that is very much a focus of government regulation being efficient and effective. Probably the most prominent example is that a certified aerodrome is required when it's accepting or made available to a 30-seat aircraft in air transport operations. But in some cases, these aircraft operate the aerodromes without the aerodrome operator's knowledge, and then we're in a regulator in an awkward position of having to take action against the aerodrome operator when they didn't have direct control over the aircraft movement itself. So this is where risk sometimes does not reflect the regulatory requirements. We've also got a one-size-fits-all approach to certified aerodromes in terms of every certified aerodrome must do the exact same thing with regards to the actual risk. In the case of registered aerodromes, what was intended to happen back in 2003 was when Part 139 was first made, it should have been followed by two other rule parts being 121 Alpha and 121 Bravo in the CASA. And they reflect high capacity and low capacity air transport regulation. We've since changed our approach to that. It's now going to be released as Part 121 for high capacity and 135 for low capacity. But we've got a regulatory disconnect at the moment where 139 is expecting operational rules to drive outcomes, but they're not available yet. And there's also other ambiguity with how registered aerodromes are regulated. We've also got a challenge with industry that a lot of aerodromes were built, in some cases, back in the 1920s, and there's a lot of legacy infrastructure out there. And the current standards require that legacy infrastructure is recorded in the aerodrome manual, but also that the standard which applied at the time is also found and documented, and also the time frame and plan to bring that facility in compliance also has to be documented. This creates a challenge for some facilities which, in a sense, it's not possible to bring them into the current MOS. And the only way we can manage that is through exemptions, which are only intended for short-term non-compliances. So we have a challenge through CASA Part 11 how to manage that. It costs us in terms of resource time to review these exemption requests. It also costs industry time and also money in having to continually renew exemptions for the same thing. And that again links back to the unnecessary cost burdens with the government policies and also our directive for effective regulation. So we're trying to bring those changes and challenges into a solution with Part 139. Some other issues are that we've had CASA Part 175 made, but that means there's some duplication between 175 and the current reporting requirements in Part 139, which we need to address. If you recall, one of the policy positions for Australia is the signatory ICAO to follow Annex 14 wherever possible. In the current Chapter 9, however, that we have significant differences at the moment with Annex 14 Volume 1. Of course, any update gives the opportunities to do general technical updates, corrections, and or clarifications to address historic issues. And likewise, any ambiguous language can be improved through updated guidance material. So from those policy, one of the key proposals we're going to start with is the removal of certain other aerodromes. Now, for those who don't know what a certain other aerodrome is basically an aeroplane landing area that's used more than once a week by a 10-seat aircraft. So it could be a Cessna Caravan operates at a remote dirt strip. If that aircraft lands at that aerodrome more than twice in the week, it becomes a certain other aerodrome. And the aerodrome operator may not be aware that that's happened. It's very difficult for CASA to monitor this because if that service then stops, that certain other aerodrome now reverts automatically back to being an aeroplane landing area again. So that's why we're proposing to remove that tier of aerodrome classification. For red-footed aerodromes, what we're looking to do is to remodel certification to be scalable. And what we're trying to do is make this what we call a renaming exercise largely with existing registered aerodromes. So basically what they do today, they can continue to do tomorrow, with the exception of the return of an aerodrome manual. Now, we are aware that it is a regulatory impost and we have to look for cost offset as per the policy, but we believe we've got a useful tool which we can provide industry which will minimise the regulatory impost of this requirement. For certified aerodromes, we're looking to have them on the same scalable certificate, which is commensurate with risk, and also make more outcome-based legislation available. The tool which might help both certified and registered aerodromes with their manuals is a tool called MAT, which stands for the Manual Authoring and Assessment Tool. MAT is an online document program which provides template and sample text with, to assist aerodrome operators in this case with writing content for a manual. The system is actually very customizable because with the baseline template and sample text, additional sections in the manual can be added as required. One of the benefits of MAT is that supporting guidance is provided each step of the journey. So we've also got sample forms and diagrams that can be provided, or you can import your own that you use today with your aerodrome operations and procedures. Another benefit of MAT is it's fully automated, so the focus is really on populating the content of the manual, with the system managing on your behalf the table of contents, the pagination, the list of effective pages, and also managing version control overall. So any subsequent changes which are made to the manual, in a sense you might make a technical amendment, but the system automatically changes any pagination and those elements automatically. The system allows that various parts of the manual to be sent for assessment independently, but you can actually monitor the progress of any CASA assessment through the system. Another benefit of MAT is the use of what we call placeholders. So if you've got a word that's used throughout your manual, maybe a position, title, or location, we understand if that one thing changes, it's a very arduous task to go through the entire manual searching for that word. With MAT, those terms can be actually reserved as placeholders, which means by changing the placeholder, any time that's used throughout the document, it's automatically updated and again paginated with the summary, effective changes, etc. managed on your behalf. So we see a lot of benefit with MAT for registered aerodromes looking to potentially have a manual in the future, but also some certified aerodromes might be interested in its capabilities as well. So this next slide shows what MAT looks like. So on the left is where the manual content would be populated. So that would be here. So on the right-hand side is how the assistance to writing the content can be provided. So we've got the references, sample text. There's also the ability to add attachments, and the attachments can be either one sample that CASA provides you with, or you could readily import what you're using today at your aerodrome. There's also the ability for you to have notes recorded. Now the notes would not be seen by CASA, but that could be useful if you've got multiple people writing sections within a common manual, or you might want to record the history of your manual editing so that if a person changes and is subsequently replaced by another, all the corporate history is actually recorded forever. The comments section, however, can be used if you want to provide some background as to why you're populating your manual content in a particular way. This would be sent to CASA and just provides useful context that can help us assess your manual more effectively. So when the information is provided on the left-hand screen with the sample text that's there for assistance, what then gets generated is a manual page. This is what your manual would look like from MAT. And that can be exported in numerous formats, including Word as a PDF. But it can also be used in an HTML format, which is used for online web editing. So you could potentially have your manual on an online intranet as well. So the system is actually quite flexible. This next screen shows basically the progress of an assessment. Now, with the current manual, we have to have the whole thing completed before we send it to CASA for review. With MAS, individual sections can be individually sent to CASA and can be reviewed as you continually work on other parts of your manual. And when you get to the end and all the sections are accepted, then the entire manual would be notionally accepted as well. And any subsequent amendments you make, you may have to change potentially one part of your manual and get that re-accepted. So that's a little bit on MASH, which again might help with that policy of cost reduction for a new regulatory requirement. But some other changes are with the regulation. So because we're proposing to put or remove certain other aerodromes and also registered aerodromes, the existing subparts C and D of the regulation will be removed. What we're also doing is changing the regulatory style. At the moment, the current regulation is a mixture of very detailed technical information and also heads of power for the current MOS. We want to change the new regulation to be just providing heads of power with all the technical information pushed down to the manual standards level. And this results in a more concise regulation where at the moment it's 20 pages down from the current 60. One new thing we're looking to introduce, however, is an accountable manager. Now, accountable manager is basically used in numerous other CASA parts, and we're looking to do it for Part 139 as well, more to ratify what's already currently happening. So at the moment when we look at doing surveillance in an aerodrome or we write to an aerodrome, we address the letter to someone very senior organisation, normally a CEO, a general manager or another senior manager. What we're looking to have aerodromes do is nominate who that person is and ensuring that person has the, I suppose, oversight and it can direct resources within the organisation to ensure that compliance and safety of the aerodrome is maintained. But again, that's one of the questions that we have in the NPRM response, so we're interested in your feedback. Now, penalties are largely unchanged. Whilst we've changed the regulation, we're trying to preserve the structure of the existing penalties because we have an existing aviation safety regulation review where there is a requirement for CASA to consider the penalties overall. So that's considered out of scope of this particular project, and any changes to penalties will be applied across all the CASAs, including Part 139 in the future. We're also making minor changes to other parts of the regulation, specifically Subpart E dealing with obstacles, and it's really about the height at which obstacles need to be reported to align it properly with Part 175, and also Subpart F, which deals with radio communication services. So returning to the MOS, we're looking to repeal and replace the manual standards. Probably the most fundamental changes in Chapter 9, which has been completely rewritten to align more with Annex 14. But we've also incorporated new Annex 14 amendments such as the taxiway minimum separation distances, reduction in taxiway strip widths and runway strip widths like I am proposing, and also a very change to the way the coding is actually applied. As a way of example, runway widths which are traditionally linked to wingspan are now linked to outer main gear wheel span, and that's also the case for taxiways, turning nodes and other elements. We're looking to have an increased use of notes to provide in-situ guidance, and also highlight throughout the document what is considered to be best practice, even if it may not be an underlying standard. And the other material we're intending to move to a revised suite of advisory circulars and other supporting information. So with grandfathering, I might want to talk about that for a minute because that is very much linked to the policy setting of ensuring that new regulations don't create new cost imposts or they are offset. So we're looking to change existing grandfathering where, unlike the current situation today where there's a plan of timescale required to bring any facility into compliance, we're looking to have a new grandfathering arrangement where the very existence of a facility at the time that the rule will be made, which we're anticipating to be around August next year, will automatically be grandfathered. And that grandfathering would remain until that facility is upgraded or replaced by the aerodrome. Now, what I want to make clear is that maintenance is not intended to trigger an upgrade. So we've tried to be very clear in the way we drafted the regulation, sure that isn't unintendedly happen. But again, happy to receive your feedback. To reduce the cost impost of exemptions for the same elements on an aerodrome, we're trying to make approvals possible for anything within the manual standards, which isn't the case today. Now, we can't write a rule set that's going to suit every single aerodrome, being the variation of complexity, size. So we're trying to build a rule set that's going to suit most aerodromes, But if there is an alternative means of compliance that is desired by the operator, the changes we're hoping will allow that to be approved on the basis of a case being submitted to CASA. And we'll provide enhanced guidance as to how to submit a safety case and what are things we're looking for in that regard. And once approval is issued, it can be enduring until the aerodrome facility is, in a sense, upgraded and brought into compliance, the discretion of the aerodrome operator or some other operational change occurs. Another thing worth noting is we've tried where possible to preserve the structure of the existing MOS. So whilst we're no longer calling the various elements chapters, they're now called parts. So for the most part, the parts will reflect the existing chapter numbering. So part 5, by way of example, in the new MOS is basically the chapter 5 in existing MOS with regard to aeronautical information and so forth. So what we're also looking to change is the compliance triggers. So on the current MOS, if a runway is available for an air transport operation or charter, basically a regular public transport over 30 seats, it needs to be a certified aerodrome, or the presence of a challenge flight procedure being either registered or a certified aerodrome. In the new proposal, we're making certification purely on the basis of the aerodrome having published instrument flight procedures or voluntarily opting in. And under the proposed operational rules under CASA Part 121, there may be a requirement for air transport operations to occur at a certified aerodrome, which is why aerodromes may voluntarily decide to opt into the system. With regard to the manual standards, we're looking at various tiers. So international aerodromes would be expected to meet full Annex 14 requirements as regard to our international obligations. But for all other aerodromes, we're looking at introducing new triggers based on air transport passenger movements and aircraft movements. Now how that works is, as the aerodromes get busier, basically being more aircraft landing and operating from the aerodrome, or more passengers being on the aerodrome, we're looking to have those aircraft movement rates be reflective of an increased safety risk. And therefore, there is a justification on the regulatory policy to introduce regulatory requirements. So at aerodromes where there's low aircraft movement rates or little or no passenger movement activities, only the baseline regulations would apply. But as the aerodromes get busier and the risk increases, then more regulatory requirements would be imposed. So on the next slide is a table we've extracted from the most proposed rulemaking. Now most of the detail is in the manual standards and also in the NPRM preamble. Basically the greatest cutover is at the 50,000 passenger movement rate per annum, which is here, which reflects on safety management systems, technical inspections, emergency planning, presence of an emergency committee, which have actually mapped to 350 in line with the aft trigger, and emergency exercising and also wildlife hazard management plans. Below that, we're looking to have a scalable certificate approach where, whilst we recommend SMS, a risk management plan, which in reality most aerodrome operators would have otherwise through the fact that they've got enterprise risk management in place, and CASA would recognise that, but that's where we'd look to have a risk management plan in place at that rate, 25,000 air transport passengers. And with regards to technical inspections, at the bottom end having the validation, which is just checking your manual and your report information annually, which is actually a current regulatory requirement under Part 175, so reported information. But then scaling up in the technical inspections to the full technical inspection as the aerodrome gets busier. Now the split technical inspection is an attempt to consider cost, because technical inspections require aerodromes often to bring in external expertise if it's not available internally. But reflecting the lower risk, we're looking to have pavements and lighting inspections only being done every couple of years, with all other elements being done annually at this rate. So these are some of the proposals that we're looking at. However, whilst the focus on the air transport passengers, there are some aerodromes which have a lot of aircraft movements, but not a lot of passenger activity. A good example of that is the Class D aerodromes such as Archerfield, Moorabbin, Jandakot, etc. So in those cases, their movement rates might push them up into either the risk management plan or quite likely to be the safety management system level if they have more than 100,000 aircraft movement rates. Now how it's supposed to work is whatever trigger you hit first, being aircraft movements or transport passenger movements, would drive the regulatory requirement. And likewise, technical inspections, as the aerodromes get busier with aircraft movements, they may also be hit the trigger for the various technical inspection requirements as well. Now this is a key proposal, so we've got lots of questions in the NPRM on linking regulatory requirements to aircraft movements and air transport passenger movements. So very interested in your feedback. Now, with regard to feedback, I'll now hand over to our Communications Officer, Hannah, who's going to give an overview of the communications made to date and also give you a bit of information about how you can provide us with feedback. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. I'm part of a small communication team at CASA that works across regulatory projects. And one of my main tasks is to manage the communication for Part 139. So to help build a picture of how CASA works together on a project like the Part 139 PIR, I'll tell you a bit about the role of communication. I'll provide you with an update on the communication so far, what's next, and how you can stay in touch. Communication is a function incorporated into every regulatory project at CASA. It's about putting a different lens across the same information to find a story to tell and make sure we have clear answers to all the basic questions like, why is this regulation changing? Who will it impact? What will it mean? And what will people need to do? The communication aspect of a project is a bit like an iceberg in that what's published or distributed as emails, news articles, brochures and the like is really the tip. The majority of the work is in building a holistic picture from as much information as possible. So this includes looking at past regulatory projects, industry reports, talking to staff across CASA, and attending industry events to hear questions, feedback and concerns. This picture of the operating environment, understanding and acknowledgement of industry issues and sensitivities, historical issues and other background information forms the foundation for a communication strategy that identifies who to tell, what to tell, how to tell and when to tell it. This communication foundation helps us understand what information will be particularly important to the audience or stakeholder. Some examples of this for Part 139 are operating costs. We know this is an issue for most aerodromes. How any regulatory change will impact running costs will be an important concern that needs to be addressed in our communication. Competing priorities. We know a lot of aerodromes are operated by local councils that have other issues to deal with. In our communication, information on the tools and assistance available to make it easier to meet any new regulatory requirements will be very important. Darren shared with us about the MAP tool, and there'll be more information and demonstrations for this tool in future. How we communicate is based on experience of what works, balanced with an understanding of the particular audience we need to communicate with. What has been really important in the case of Part 139 communication has been a particular effort on making sure we're reaching the right people. One of the communication challenges with an aerodrome project, of course, is aerodromes are so diverse in their operations and they're spread across the country, including very remote places. Prior to consultation on the updated Part 139 rule, one of our first communication tasks focused on identifying and contacting every manager of a regulated aerodrome directly with an email or a phone call. We utilised this up-to-date list to send out notifications once the proposed rules were released for consultation. As well as this, we have focused on giving presentations to aerodrome operators at various events and forums across Australia, including the AAA divisional meetings and Lighting and Pavements Forum, in an effort to give everyone an opportunity to hear about the proposed updates to the rule. This is also an opportunity to hear your questions and concerns and any feedback, which will influence future communication. The communication strategy isn't a set and forget process. It's continual and constantly checked against what we know and any issues that arise. So collaboration and feedback is really important. The more we understand the audience and the issues as you see them, the more we can anticipate your questions and tailor information for clear and helpful resources. I've spoken about how initially our communication strategy has been about making direct contact with aerodrome managers. We've also identified the government organisations and industry bodies that can help us spread the word. If you haven't received an email or phone call from us about the consultation, please let us know at the end of this presentation so we can update our list and make sure we include you in future communications. Other channels we've utilised so far for distributing messages are the CASA website, CASA publications like CASA Briefing and Flight Safety Australia, emails to our subscriber email list, social media, and internal presentations and information to CASA staff for consistency of message. We'll be distributing regular reminders until the end of consultation through these channels. From commencement to transition, we'll focus on resources that drill down to what the changes mean and what you may need to do to meet any new regulatory requirements. This will include distributing a finalised transition table that will show the requirements at a glance and information about resources and guidance material available to make things easier. So to keep in touch and make sure you're receiving regular news from us, please sign up to our CASA Briefing monthly newsletter and also our airspace and aerodromes mailing list. You can select these options by going to casa.gov.au/subscribe. If you have any general questions or feedback, we'd love you to send them to our regulatory program email address, which is regulatory-program@casa.gov.au. For formal feedback on the consultation, please use CASA's Consultation Hub, which is consultation.casa.gov.au. I'll hand back to Darren to share more information about this Consultation Hub.
Thank you, Hannah. Now, the Consultation Hub is a relatively new platform that CASA is looking to use for consultation, including Part 139. So this just provides a bit of a screenshot of the, the landing page for the Consultation Hub, which provides an overview and then a direct link to the NPRM package. And there's an address there at the bottom if you can't find it. As I said before, it's we're looking at social media, our web page and other things to help sort of drive you towards where the Consultation Hub resides so you can provide us with the appropriate feedback. Now, the NPRM package itself contains a preamble which basically has an overview of the policy I've touched on before and explains also the why and the how of the process. So the policy I've touched on before and explains also the why and the how of the process. Then we've got the draft regulation and also the draft manual standards for you to review. But what we believe is going to be the most useful to you is actually the change summary documents and understanding the intent or context behind the changes. What we've looked to do is to actually map the existing regulation and manual standards to the changes. So in a tabulated form, we'll highlight has a change been made, if so, why, the justification and the proposal, and then also its new home in the new document. So we can also better understand the proposal feedback as well. We've got about 10 or 11 dedicated questions on various key aspects of the policy. So we'd like to hear feedback on those. And also to better understand your issues, concerns, etc., we also need to understand the demographic of the responses. So we've got some questions about, where you're located, what size of aerodrome you are, what your anticipated level of activity is. But if you're not an aerodrome operator, also what other section of the industry you're from. And also there'll be a free text field and the ability to upload any questions or dedicated tables of feedback that you have. So with regards to what's next, I'll now hand over to Denise Morman, who's our project manager, who will outline the steps post-consultation as we work towards implementation.
Thanks, Darren. Hi, everyone. I'm Denise. I'm one of the project managers in the Regulatory Development and Implementation branch. The amended Part 139 regulation and MOS are currently out for consultation. Responses close on the 8th of December this year. Please ensure you have your say by that date using the Consultation Hub. At the end of the consultation period, a review of the responses will be undertaken, and if the regulation or MOS require amending, drafting instructions will be prepared. They will go to the Office of Parliamentary Counsel for the regulation and to CASA's legal section for the MOS. If there is a significant shift from what is currently proposed, CASA will re-involve the industry project team. A summary of consultation is prepared and approved. Then the regulatory package is prepared and sent to the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development for their review and approval. The Minister signs off, and then the regulation goes to the Executive Council for the Governor-General to sign off. Once signed, the regulation is made. CASA's director approves and makes the MOS. This is expected around August of next year. Before the regulation and MOS are made, All project management documentation would be developed and approved. For example, the project plan, project schedule, risk register and transition strategy. Once a regulation and MOS are made, the implementation period commences for 12 months. During that time, we need to get CASA and industry ready for the commencement of the regulation and MOS. One of the first things we will do is conduct a gap analysis on the CAPs and advisory circulars. Existing ones will be updated and where necessary new ones will be created. CASA also needs to refile the existing differences with ICAO. Any forms will be reviewed and updated and where necessary new forms will be created. End-to-end business process maps will be developed for staff to manage aerodrome certificates. CASA's Client Services Centre in Brisbane will assist by managing the entry and exit of this process. Assessments will still be conducted by aerodrome inspectors. Existing manuals will be updated, for example, the Aerodrome Certification, Registration and Approved Persons Procedures Manual and the CASA Surveillance Manual. As mentioned earlier, sample manuals will be put into MAT. An assessor's handbook and worksheet will be developed for the aerodrome inspectors to ensure consistency across the regions when assessing applications for aerodrome certificates. And staff and industry will be trained. During the development of the various documents and systems, staff and industry will be invited to do some road testing and user acceptance testing. Of note, for those attending next month's AAA National Conference in Adelaide, our MAT coordinator will be available to demonstrate the MAT system. Gate reviews will be conducted throughout the life cycle of the project. A gate review is held to confirm that we are ready to move to the next phase. For example, a gate review will be held before the regulation and MOS are made, and also before they commence. Gate reviews are conducted prior to staff training and before industry training. A final gate review is also conducted prior to the transition period ending. Lessons identified from previous projects will be taken into account during the implementation and transition periods. Commencement of the regulation and MOS is expected in August of 2019. Therefore, certified aerodromes will have from August 2019 to August 2020 to transition. Registered aerodromes will have from August 2019 to 2021 to transition. So just to recap, the next steps are the final drafting and approvals of the amended regulation and MOS. The implementation team will take approximately 12 months to prepare CASA and industry for the commencement of the amended regulation and MOS. Once the rules commence, operators can start to transition. For approximately 3 months after the commencement date, the implementation project team will ensure all of the outputs that were developed during the implementation phase and are now being used by operators are working effectively and efficiently. This is called the rework phase. This could be anything from ensuring MAT is working efficiently through to our published guidance material being effective. At the end of the transition period, 1 year for certified aerodromes and 2 years for registered aerodromes, the ongoing work becomes business as usual. That's it from me. I'll hand back to Darren.
All right, thank you, Denise. So what I'd like to do is open the floor now to the numerous questions I've seen have come in and also some we received prior to the webinar. So I might just hand back to David and the Redback facilitator so we can work to the next stage of the webinar.
Thanks very much, Darren. I have a range of questions which were sent in prior to today, and I'll just go through those. I've already supplied them to Darren, so hopefully he's prepared. So I'll go through those and then we'll move on to the other questions. So question number 1 is, do the passenger and aircraft movement thresholds apply to both certified and non-certified aerodromes, i.e. table 1 on page 15 of the NPRM?
All right, thanks, David. At the moment, the way we've presently drafted the MOS will only apply to a certified aerodrome, with the exception of radio communications facilities, which I explained will be applicable to any aerodrome. But what we're going to do, however, is consider industry feedback, because we might need to consider further refinements or changes to the trigger criteria to ensure they will function as intended.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Question 2. If the MOS only applies to certified aerodromes, as outlined on page 1 of the draft MOS, instrument You know what I mean? It's from 2017. What are the standards or requirements for non-certified aerodromes?
Okay, at the moment, it's the case today. Part 139 only applies to a certain other registered or certified aerodrome. So in the new proposals, we'd look to have them apply again to certified aerodromes only, with the exception again of the radio communications facilities. But that being said, CASA has detailed guidance material published for aeroplane landing areas through Civil Aviation Advisory Publication 92-1. What we tend to do is update this guidance material as part of the project, and also to support the forthcoming what we call CASA Part 91 amendments, which are rules for pilots, to ensure that they have the latest information about aerodrome standards, etc. But in the case for guidance material, it is just that guidance. Because under Civil Aviation Regulation 92, which will be changed in the fullness of time through CASA Part 91, the responsibility for selecting a suitable aerodrome resides with the pilot in command. And this responsibility is then jointly shared by any supporting ASC if applicable. So what we want to do is make sure that the guidance material is up to date to support the pilot making that decision. But in terms of the applicability of the standards, it's really only intended for certified aerodromes going forward.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Third question. The need to use either aircraft movements or passenger movements, including additional requirements relating to aircraft movements when passenger movements have already been taken into account, is confusing, i.e. as outlined in Table 1 on page 15 of the NPRM.
Okay. Well, we tried to do that table to try to simplify what is actually embedded legally within the draft MOS and also within the regulation. But again, as Hannah said, any feedback you can give us on how we're providing information is very, very welcome to ensure there isn't any confusion. But the intention is that it's whatever trigger would otherwise be hit first, and I think in most cases it would be based on passenger movements. But for aerodromes, as I said before, like Archerfield, Parafield, Jandakot, Moorabbin, etc., those metro training aerodromes are very busy in terms of aircraft movements, but not from passenger movements. So the aircraft movement triggers are really designed to be a catch-all that wouldn't otherwise hit the passenger movements. But it's whatever trigger is breached, that's when the regulatory requirement would apply.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Fourth question, how will thresholds be determined, particularly if aircraft movement / passenger numbers vary from year to year? A suggestion from industry is that a 3-year average be used. How much time will an aerodrome operator be given to transition from one threshold to another once it is determined that their threshold has changed?
That's a very good question from the member who put it forward, because we're a little bit in uncharted territory in even putting this up. So this is really good feedback you're getting through the NPRM. The intention, however, is the aerodrome operators would be responsible for monitoring their own passenger and aircraft movements because they're best placed to do that, understanding the operation of their aerodrome. But there is some supporting information available through BITRA, and BITRA provides air transport passenger movements annually, and it's published on the department's website, so we'd be looking to monitor that. But most aerodromes, for charging purposes, we understand to be keeping a pretty close eye on their aircraft movement rates, and they'll be either clearly in or clearly out of that trigger. So for aerodromes that have next to no aircraft movements, no passenger movements, that would be well below 50,000. And in those cases, those aerodromes might not be doing any monitoring because they know that. But the responsibility really is on the aerodrome operator to, if they believe they're going to hit a trigger, to be ready to provide the compliant response from day one. But that being said, we understand that operations change, and we've got to look at our regulatory philosophy and regulatory principles. We're not an inflexible regulator. We have to use administrative processes and consider industry challenges as well. So there might be the opportunity for exemptions to be considered, an open dialogue to be maintained with the inspector. But again, these proposals we're looking to put forward, we probably need to fine-tune them. So please put this feedback in, and we'll look to potentially refining how the triggers apply to ensure they actually will function as intended.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Final one from this group is, can more detail on technical inspections be provided? It appears that the cost to have technical inspections will be increased with the need to have certified electricians or engineering specialists.
Another good question. Look, we have to balance the need to have the correctly qualified people, but also not provide undue cost to aerodromes. The intent is really, as far as who can do the inspection, be largely preserved. But again, we're looking to the feedback. because we're aware in remote and regional locations, getting access to suitably qualified people is a challenge. But conversely, we'll make sure that people doing inspections have the appropriate skills, qualifications and experience to do inspections properly, and that information reported both to the aerodrome operator and to also us indirectly. Because that information is actually then fed into a risk-based surveillance program, and if an aerodrome looks like it's lower risk, well, there might be a opportunity for CASA to change the surveillance schedule of that particular aerodrome operator and focus on other locations which are deemed to be high risk based on basically high movements or passenger numbers. But again, you guys are the experts out there in terms of who you can get, how readily they are available, and also the various consultants, etc., who provide these services. So we're very, very keen to have that feedback provided with the MPRM. So again, we can look to refine the regulation and the standards to function as intended. But the intent is to not create undue cost on industry as well, because that's a key regulatory policy we're trying to follow.
Okay, thanks very much, Darren. I'm sure there'll be more questions around those as well. Now, the next question that I have relates to, I think, a principle more than anything else. And I don't want to read it right out because it's talking about one particular example, but it goes to the heart of the form of regulation where you don't give exact requirements, such as how many times a runway needs to be swept, or that sort of nature. So maybe if you could expand a little bit on the regulatory intent with the drafting.
Okay. Now, with redrafting a MOS of this size, the reason it was redrafted twice is the first redraft was to make sure the technical requirements are accurate. But then when we got to the end, our legal drafter, having the technical information settled, looked at it from a legal perspective, and there was a lot of concerns over its legal function, so actually he redrafted it a second time. So the MOS, unfortunately, is a legislative document, so it has to meet legislative drafting requirements, which in some cases means, as the current MOS is, that the regulatory intent can sometimes be lost. And there is therefore a role for guidance material to sort of support or explain the regulatory approach that could be taken by aerodromes in various elements. So that's where the feedback on the MPRM is actually invaluable, because at the moment only the legislative drafters and the project people in CASA have been working on it, as the representative industry project team. But now we've got hundreds of experts out there in industry who can provide us with their opinions about how the regulation is read in their own words. So that feedback is definitely invaluable. But when we're trying to do more outcome-based regulation, which is provide the outcome to be achieved or the target, and leave it up to the aerodromes to come up with whatever means to achieve that, that's great in terms of flexibility, but some aerodromes also just want to be told what to do to meet baseline compliance, which is a prescription. So we're trying to do both, provide prescriptive options where appropriate, but also provide outcome-based options, but also the supporting guidance material to clarify how that could work. So it is a little bit of a work in progress. So again, please provide your feedback in. If something doesn't appear clear, we need to know, because we've got an opportunity next year when we look to settle the rules to further refine them and tweak them and then revalidate them with the project group to ensure they're functioning as intended.
Okay, thanks, Darren. That was the last of the pre-questions. So I'll hand over to Jeff, who was collecting the questions as we were going through the presentation.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Darren. So our first question, does the new grandfathering mean that capital-constrained airports or owners who don't want to invest in their airport will not have to upgrade facilities for an undetermined time period?
Yeah, in effect, that's exactly what we're proposing. Again, we're looking for your feedback. So in the proposed MOS, the reference code will be nominated for each facility by the aerodrome operator, and that will be how CASA is looking to look to you from a compliance perspective. So an existing facility that exists prior to the make date, which again we're looking at August next year, will be recorded in the manual based on its nominated code, and then it gets sort of sit there, in a sense, indefinitely. But in reality, the operation will likely grow, and when the operation grows, there might be a need by the aerodrome operator to upgrade or replace that facility or re-nominate it to a higher reference code to allow higher aircraft type to use it. So that's what we're looking to have, in a sense. So aerodromes that have these facilities for a long time, might continue to have them for a long time, don't get caught up in the need to seek exemption or chase down legacy standards or work to a plan of timescale for compliance when they may not be in a position to do so. But for those other aerodromes looking to grow and expand their businesses, when they do make those decisions, that will be where the upgrade or replacement would be triggered in terms of the intent, policy intent, and that would be where the new facility has to meet the new standards. But again, that's one of the MPRN questions, so happy to get your feedback to ensure we get it right.
Thanks, Darren. The next question, who reviews the air transport movements for the aerodrome? Does this happen at surveillance audits or annually with submissions to CASA? Does the upgrading documentation triggered per financial year or rolling 12 months?
Okay. Again, we're in uncharted territory on this, but the proposal we're looking forward is for aerodromes to self-monitor because they understand their operation. What CASA will be doing from our normal review process is just keep an eye on the movement rate data we normally get from BITRA every year. We've also got the ability to request, if the data is available, that is, from the aerodrome operator, their air transport passenger movements or aircraft movements. So it'd be a sort of a remote monitoring program that we're putting forward, but again, we need to get the feedback from industry and also internally to make sure it's workable going forward. So aerodromes should be then considering if they, if they are going to get close to a trigger to ensure that they monitor that, and when they believe they're going to hit the trigger to ensure that they're geared up, ready for the new compliance requirement. Because again, there might be a degree of flexibility in talking to their assigned inspector about how that's implemented. But again, because we haven't done this yet, we need your feedback so we can further refine the proposal.
What defines infrastructure maintenance in new MOS? For example, is a full runway maintenance overlay considered to be maintenance under the grandfathering changes?
That's not the intention, because we're aware that even when you do overlays, you might change the PCN of the underlying pavement. But that's clearly nominated through AIP to pilots, so they should know if their pavement is adequate for their aircraft movements. And again, we're aware that some aerodrome operators choose to allow the overloading of pavements through concessions for a limited number of movements. So that's more of a commercial consideration, unless it becomes a safety aspect if the pavement's overloaded and fails. So we're not really looking for that to trigger an upgrade. But things that would trigger an upgrade, and there's a clear list in the proposed MOS amendment, are things like changing the reference code for a facility, changing its nature from non-instrument to instrument non-precision, or from non-precision to a precision, and there's some other ones in there. So they would be clear, unambiguous changes to an operation, which is a clear trigger. But again, please look at those, and if you think they're not clear enough or the intent's not right, give us the feedback. But yeah, to round out the question, general maintenance is not intended to trigger an upgrade.
Regarding accountable manager, what are the responsibilities and legal ramifications?
That might be a question not so much for CASA. What we're looking for is the compliance with our rule set. Any legal ramification probably comes more into common law or tort law, which is probably something that the aerodrome operators need to explore with their insurers and other experts. From our perspective, the reason we want accountable manager nominated, as I explained before, was to be consistent with the other CASA parts and to really ratify what's the case today, where we're writing to the very senior levels of organisations as being overall responsibility. In this proposal, however, the aerodrome operators will be free to choose who they believe is the accountable person. And we've done that intentionally because no organisation is the same. They've got different reporting lines, different organisational structures. So whoever gets nominated has to be accountable for the aerodrome, basically being safe and compliant in regards to CASA's functions under the Act, and ensuring that person can appropriately ensure that the operation is resourced in terms of providing a safe operation.
Who reviews the PAX number at an aerodrome?
Again, that I believe would be monitored by the aerodrome operator. We'd be remote monitoring through the BITRA data, or we'd be requesting that data if we weren't sure if an aerodrome was over the line or under. And there's a power which we're looking to put in the CASAs that allows us to request that information, but only if the information is actually maintained by the aerodrome operator. And we've modelled that on the current Part 175 data originator requirements, where services can request data from a party if they have the data available. So that's the proposal we're putting up. Again, interested in your feedback.
Will there be additional instruction for operators of ungrooved asphalt runways, obviously not meeting the 1 mil texture requirement, but maintaining friction characteristics above the maintenance planning level?
Yeah, this is an area that we basically consult extensively for the project team. And at the end of the day, we may not have it right yet. But what we need to do is broaden the consultation beyond the project team to all the other experts in the industry. What we're trying to achieve is aligning our standards with the ICAO recommendation of 1mm texture. We're aware that there's different texture for different overlays and surfaces, etc. And there's actually some work being done at ICAO level in the pavements group to try to rationalise the ICAO SARPs as well. And if they get changed, we may well follow suit with our proposed amendments, but they may happen now or they might have to happen into the future. But to counterbalance that, what we're looking to do is have some more outcome-based requirements in regarding to meeting minimum friction, but also balancing that against the cost of doing friction testing. So what we're trying to put forward is that they can either provide a surface that meets 1mm texture or have some other surface treatment that meets minimum friction, and that would have to be monitored in some way by the aerodrome operator. We've also put in the ability to do sand patch testing for verification, with when sand patch testing would have to be done as a minimum, but aerodrome operators may choose to do it over and above that. And also the technical inspections would have, I guess, a visual inspection done by the technical inspectors, say, is minimum friction compromised by something that's obvious. So, but yeah, this is a very, very detailed area, and CASA doesn't necessarily have the expertise. That's why we're really looking for detailed feedback from industry and all the pavements experts and aerodrome operators out there. And we may need to make further refinements to that element of the MOS. So please provide feedback on that proposal as well.
Follow-up regarding PAX number. BITRA does not pick up all movements, so that number is recognised to underreport total PAX numbers, particularly in airports where there are regular movements in commercial charter flights.
Yeah, I guess that's why we're looking for the aerodrome operators to really be self-monitoring, because no one understands their operation better than them. BITRA is what we consider to be a lag indicator, so that would be just us verifying. But we imagine that most aerodromes will be either clearly in or clearly out of those trigger criteria. But as I've said a few times now, it's something we haven't done before, so we might need to make further refinements based on the feedback we're given. So please provide detailed submissions, and that might be something we need to refocus on, because really the intent is to have a scalable structure. So the busier the aerodrome gets, the more regulatory requirements would be imposed. So that's the intent. Maybe we need to look at how we actually structure the movement triggers and how they're drafted in the legal sections of the MOS to ensure they're functioning as intended.
Infrastructure triggers. What, if any, role does the airport building controller have in assessing infrastructure in relation to CASAs?
Yeah, that's probably...
Building controller have in assessing infrastructure in relation to CASAs?
Yeah, that's probably something I function under the Airports Act. So what we'd be looking at is the facility compliant with our MOS? But the role of the airport building controller, as I understand it, is to give a specific approval under the Airports Act. Now, CASA might be called as a referral body to provide comment, as a lot of bodies are, including air services and the aerodrome operators themselves. So what we'd really be doing is feeding that general information as we do today for the consideration of the building controller. But that's definitely out of scope for CASA's responsibility.
Will these changes result in an increased amount of safety cases to be submitted to CASA, and how will CASA resource up to address these in a timely manner?
That's a very good question. We're probably anticipating a bit of an influx in the beginning as everyone's trying to bed down their approvals that they're seeking that. We're expecting that there would then be a drop-off because unlike the current system, where exemptions have to be renewed every 3 years, a lot of these approvals can be enduring, which means they can basically set statically until something else changes. But with regard to resourcing, we actually did an internal workshop for that exact reason. We've identified that resourcing is a challenge, as it is with other organisations. So we're going to have to appropriately gear up ourselves with the appropriately qualified people. But one of the things we're looking to do is to streamline aerodromes under the overall banner of the client service system. So we've got a very, very refined process for all other approvals. We give the pilots licenses, maintenance organisations, and the rest. And we're looking to use that same resource to do the initial checking of applications before they're referred to an aerodrome inspector, which hopefully will start to streamline the process and also better assist with us tracking where a particular application is up to. And if it's one that is potentially, lingering, we might better need to resource up tactically to address that. So we're looking at a more transparent process that's appropriately resourced.
And our final question that's come in, will NCN's observations or safety findings or safety observations be written where appropriate against MOS 139 or CASAs?
Well, all that's in the CASA surveillance manual. If you're interested, you can find it on CASA's website. There's a separate project that's looking at how the CASA surveillance manual functions, and that's one of the recommendations from the Aviation Safety Regulation Review. With regard to the Part 139 project, what we're looking really to do is to change the underlying regulations and standards that apply to aerodrome operators. How CASA discharges its surveillance responsibilities is really under that CASA surveillance manual, which is separate. But of course, there are some sections in the CASA surveillance manual which we really link to the current regulatory structure. As Denise indicated, that will have to be updated with the new proposals. But it's a very good question, but probably not one I can actually answer.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, David. So I'll just hand back to you in a moment. If I could just remind all our participants to please take a moment to fill out the webinar survey, which is currently on the right-hand side of your screen. Darren and David, I'll now hand back to you.
All right.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Jeff. Darren, did you have any other final closing remarks you'd like to make?
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. I just wanted to really come back to where we began, which is the governing policy. So number 9 was that regulation must be periodically reviewed to test its continuing relevance. I put this in there because I wanted to reassure industry we're not going to do this and then leave it for another 15 years before we do something of this scale and manage it again. What's hoped can be achieved is by rebooting, for want of a better word, Part 139 to the new structure. We will then do piecemeal amendments over time as things change. So inevitably we'll make any change to regulation. There might be some fine-tuning, which we might do a little bit of a mini post-implementation review once every aerodrome transitions, based assuming the proposals get accepted. And once that's happened, there could be other triggers like the new CASA operational regulations, which I indicated were 91, 121, 135 and the rest. They may well result in further changes to Part 139. And of course, if ICAO changes anything, which they actually are very, very active in various areas, we will make changes as well. So I just wanted to reinforce that in line government policy, we will be maintaining Part 139 as we have done already. But returning again to the CASA regulatory policy, CASA is required to consult appropriate with industry in an open and transparent manner and ensuring the communication is clear, timely and effective, and very much touched on by Hannah in her presentation on communication. We wanted to basically put that in there because we're doing a few new things with the Part 139 consultation. So we really would appreciate your feedback and have you found the process? Have you found it open? Have you found it transparent? Are our communications clear? And if they're not, what can we do to improve it? Because that feedback is really instrumental in ensuring that the goal of the review both for industry and CASA is achieved and we get the desired result both for us as a regulator and you as industry parties. So please, as much as you're giving us technical feedback on the process, also let us know how the process has functioned for you as well and what we can do to improve. So in closing, on behalf of Denise and Hannah, I just want to say thanks once again for your support and engagement. And if there's any final questions, we're happy to take those as well.
Thanks very much, Darren. Look, I'd like to thank Darren, Hannah and Denise for today. It's been a great presentation, and the questions coming in show that people are really thinking about these things. If there are any other questions that occur to you afterwards, as Darren has said, feel free to send it to him, but send them to me as well, and I'm happy to collate anything and send it through to the project team. Just a reminder, as Jeff's already asked, if you could complete the surveys, that would be great, so that we know whether we're doing these in the right way. This webinar will be made available to members via the Airport Professional webinar page in the coming week. We encourage you to provide any feedback on any other topics you'd like to see by emailing events@airports.asn.au. And finally, don't forget to register for the AAA National Conference in November in Adelaide. The full program is at our website or the airport's conference website. And also a reminder to anyone there from a regional airport, there's a scholarship program that you can have a look at. Finally, the next AAA webinar will be Asphalt and Bitumen for Airport Pavements, presented by Greg White, and that'll be the 1st of November at 11 AM. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone and do your survey, register for the conference, and we'll see you there.
David, we just got a notification. Maybe there was a question that a member asked that hasn't been answered. Can you just confirm that?
I don't know. The first question...
Yep, sorry, I can see this, yep. Upgrade is now defined. Will a definition of maintenance be provided and be unambiguous? Slab repairs in aprons for end of design life, maintenance or replacement?
Yeah, we've got a clear definition of maintenance in the proposal which you can read. We're hoping it's unambiguous, but again, we're going to leave it up to the experts out there to let us know because we're probably a little bit too close to the material. We might need to put some information in the guidance material to make that clear, but again, please provide us with that feedback. But yeah, thanks for that late question, and yeah, just want to make sure we didn't overlook that one as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.
And once again, on behalf of the team here, thank you for your time and interest.